6:30, I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee's order, being Thursday, April 17th, 2025 at 6:30. This meeting will be broadcast on Chelmsford Telemedia and available through Zoom and also be recorded for future viewing. We ask that if you are going to speak, that you let us know. Otherwise, we will be proceeding with the agenda. Call to order has occurred. The approval of minutes for March 27th, 2025 is the first item on the agenda. Has everyone had ability and the opportunity to review them?
Yes.
Yes. Do you have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the Chelmsford Finance Committee meeting minutes for March 27, 2025.
I second it.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Six in-
abstain. I didn't read it, so.
All right.
Yeah.
5 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 absent. Moving right along, we have a review and discussion of warrant Article 2 to amend the fiscal year 2025 operating agreement. With us this evening is Paul Cohen, Town Manager.
Great, and thank you. Good evening. And I'm joined by John Souza, our Finance Director. As is customary, as we approach town meeting, we work with the town accountant, Darlene Lucier, to review the status of accounts across the town to see where we are with, just over 2 months left to go in the fiscal year. Because as you know, we sort of submit this budget at this time of the year, and then we don't start it till July 1, and then reality happens to our best laid plans. And then we got a little bit nervous because it was snowing last Saturday, and we said we're going to need more snow and ice money, but fortunately we didn't have to send the crews out. But so anyway, what we have here is a few items that total $347,500 out of our $162.4 million budget. And they're listed there on the screen. These were presented and approved for recommendation by the Select Board last Monday evening. You can see the bulk of it is in municipal administration expenses and in public safety expenses. And I'll sort of just walk through those, a little bit of breakdown on the next page. The first one on the municipal administration expenses, and the bulk of it is legal services. This, in my 18th year here in the town, I don't think we've ever surpassed our legal budget, and if we did, it wasn't certainly by this magnitude. And it really has been an extraordinary year with the town. Not only do we have a transition in new council, and which required some transition and new contract documents and formats, but we've had a significant amount of land use cases before the boards of the town in terms of 40B applications. In terms of not only the hearings, but also the plans for project eligibility and so forth that's gone before the boards. We've had obviously, extensive amount of bylaw development efforts, as you've seen here for town meeting. We've also had labor council involved with collective bargaining issues, and it's just been an extreme year. And we're hoping that it does settle down, but as you know, these things are unpredictable for the community. In the human resources professional development, that is an area where we replaced a longtime 30-year employee as our HR director with a new HR director, and we really had to incur some expenses there in terms of getting the person up to certification, speed, training, and so forth, obviously which was not foreseen at the time that we developed the budget. And then Conservation Reservation Management, that's under the Conservation Commission. And what that was is it was really some peculiar aspects on a couple of parcels, one off by Freeman Lake where they had to do an extensive land survey because of a boundary dispute. And then there was some work that involved some tree removal and so forth. So again, rather extraordinary amount of activity into conservation and hopefully not expected to recur in future years. Under the issue of the public safety personnel services, the seal of weights and measures, as you know, you may recall, this service up until about 4 months ago was provided by the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. They informed the towns, their member communities, that they were no longer going to provide this service. We had operated this service under a revolving fund, and so two things happened. One is we had to basically initiate our own seal of weights and measures services, and we've done it on a regional basis with the towns of Tewksbury and Westford, and we're the lead community. But also there was no permit activity coming in because no inspections were being done. And so now we're in a case where we've got to finish the fiscal year, and we have our sealer on board. We had to do the training and certification and so forth for that person, and we're closing out the revolving fund. And so that's adjusted in the new budget going forward, but this is basically transitioning us, for the remainder of this fiscal year. So that, again, was extraordinary, unforeseen, and not what we anticipated when the budget was developed. On the area of public safety expenses, and you can see, again, a lot of this is just due to, in one case, on the police equipment for police vehicles, replacement equipment, this has to do with a couple factors. One is we had to replace a couple extra police vehicles that were insurance recovered because of some insurance claims, and then also with the newer models, the equipment doesn't fit as replacement in some of the vehicles, so you're buying new equipment to replace and install and put those vehicles into operation. The contracted services is an item that we had to bring in an outside agency to conduct a unique and hopefully one-time external, I guess, investigation, for lack of a better word, in the department, and that was completed. And again, certainly that was extraordinary and not foreseen when the budget was developed. Recruitment supplies in the police really had to do with the significant amount of turnover of officers, basically due, in some cases, to retirements, and in some cases due to turnover, where we've lost a couple of officers to other communities. And so it's just been an extraordinary year in terms of replacement and equipping of officers and promotions within the department. And again, things just aren't getting any less expensive in those areas for cost of bringing in new officers and so forth. And then again, some dues and subscriptions were just beyond what he had budgeted, the chief had budgeted in his budget. And then on the fire side, utilities, obviously, it was a colder winter and a bit of a darker winter actually in February, and so with the increases in the electricity costs that we've seen residents experience and some of the, and on the town side, even though we're contracted, we get change of contract language where if there's a mandate that's put in by the state through the utilities, very similar to what you see in the residential bills, that gets passed on and added on to even the town's accounts, despite the fact that we have a fixed price. And then obviously we use more heat this past winter than we have in a couple of years. Vehicle maintenance, again, with fire apparatus, it's just the cost and the unpredictability of fire apparatus. And then there was, you can see, a significant increase in equipment for the fire department in terms of basically maintaining the operational fleet, in terms of the Scott Air packs, hoses, nozzles, and radiator repairs. And then, always the variable of building maintenance for just over $9,000, which actually is a correction. It should be $8,000 if you do all the math, but that's okay. And then the senior center utilities is the same thing. And that really, again, was driven by electricity and a little bit by the weather. And what happened was, and John can attest to this, February, as you may recall, was a snowy month this past winter. And not only was it snowy, it was an overcast month. And so the bills came in for March, and the March bill at the senior center that came in for the month of February for the solar was very low because there wasn't much solar generation. Then when she got the National Grid bill, I mean, she immediately, reached out for help because it was extraordinary. So again, you have the change in service operations, but again, we're a little bit weather dependent. That if you have, a winter month, which isn't great for solar to begin with, so you're not only getting the non-melting, but the overcast, it sort of threw a budget, as you can see, a minor $2,000 adjustment in the overall budget. So that's a summary of where we are on the adjustments to the operating budget. As the board's committee's aware, where our funding source is the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. That would leave just over $50,000 remaining for the balance of the fiscal year, which we don't anticipate needing at this point in time, but we've got 2 months to go.
All right. Any questions?
Just a process question, because I'm still new here. So, what would happen if this doesn't get approved?
Well, what we would do is we would do like any other funding agency or that's agency that's funded. We would basically put immediate, stringent measures in place to curtail expenses. It's hard to do with salaries on the personnel side. As you can see, most of these are really expense related. But that's what we would do, is we would basically, postpone or cancel any discretionary accounts in the year ahead. But this has really been the custom that the town has had. in terms of how we've adjusted and operate the budget over the years, rather than calling the finance committee in to, as events occur repeatedly during the months, we generally tend to, true up at the time of the spring annual town meeting.
And just from memory, is it typically right around, some 300, 400,000 in that range every
In
year?
in recent years, it has been, given the times, we thought, but didn't think long about it, is should we bump up the reserve fund from $400,000, because it's been $400,000 at least for a decade.
More than a decade.
More than a decade, and I remember when we last bumped it up, to 400,000. So that would be ideal. It just wasn't the right time to do it. But on the other hand, it sort of puts us to that exposure because, for example, we're going to go $400,000 next year on a $167.8 million budget, but that's different than having $400,000 for a $120 million budget. And so that's really something that I think we'll have to wrestle with. Ideally, if it were a normal budget year, we probably would have put it up to 500,000. But this just isn't the time to do it.
As it is, it's about 0.2% of the budget.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's really, it's really, in other communities, particularly in city and other governments, they'll have sort of where they don't have a finance committee, they'll sort of have a manager's, discretionary fund is what they'll call it, and that's how you deal with these type of things. But in the town and in this town form, we basically utilize the finance committee's reserve fund.
Because that's where I was going. Is like, is $400,000 enough? Are we gonna, maybe get a surprise next year? And then, what happens if that happens? So.
Yeah. Well, again, goodness knows what's going to happen this year.
Exactly.
But we'll look at the budget at fall town meeting very carefully because, not knowing what's going to happen with the federal. Because as you know, the federal money comes to the state, to the towns. They're on an October fiscal year basis. So we'll obviously keeping an eye in case there is some dramatic shift. But we saw what happened this week with the House of Representatives at the State House. They're basically just doing business as usual until anything changes. And I guess when you don't have the information, you just go on what you have. But that is something that we're going to keep an eye on. Is where do we go from here?
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, moving along, we have the review and discussion of Warrant Article 6.
Yeah, warrant Article 6 is for collective bargaining, and I'm pleased to report that there's nothing like a deadline to get some work done, although we weren't successful at all groups. But we did achieve an agreement with the 3 police unions. What's most notable is that this is the initial contract for the newly organized police lieutenants union. And so that's sort of where we began just under about 9 months or so ago. We basically start with a clean sheet of paper in theory, but in practicality, we really use the sergeant's contract as the basis for the lieutenant's contract because in most other municipalities, including all those around us that are unionized and similar to us, they tend to be in the same group. They call the sergeants and lieutenants, but here they're 2 separate groups but the same union affiliation. So we use that as a template. It was a plotting process going through section by section, as well as looking at the non-union benefits that the lieutenants had because up until now, they were non-union employees. And then as we hit sort of the, March time frame, we sort of had the framework of a deal with the lieutenants. That had to be finalized and excised and a few items wrinkled out. But we were then able to pivot to the sergeants union, which I mentioned earlier has the same union affiliation, and we were able to reach a quick resolution with them. And then once those 2 were in place, we then met with the patrol union, which had come to the table, the latter of the 3, and we were able to get it done rather quickly, even though there were different union affiliation, because the thing you've got to realize is they all work in the same building, and generally, word gets out of where things are going. So what you see is the size of the settlements. In the case of the commanding officers, which is the lieutenants group, it covers a 4-year period. One was they started last July 1, where all the other groups had their contracts expire this coming June 30th. So we did sort of a 4-year period. And so what we're asking into this item is the $37,931 to fund the current fiscal year, and then the $80,767 for the upcoming fiscal year, because the budget has been adopted under the operating budget doesn't include any contract settlements because they're not allowed by our bylaws. So that's the way of truing it up. It also makes the contract a legitimate 3 years going forward. And then for the police superior officers, it's just over almost 46,000. And then for the much larger Patrol Officers Association, it's over $300,000.
Paul,
And yes,
just for clarification,
Yeah.
it says FY '24 and FY '25 on the slide
where did I do that?
for.
Oh gosh, then that's a typo. I will
Okay.
correct that. Thank
Because
you.
that was going to be my later question. Do we?
Yeah, it should be 25 and 26. I
Okay.
apologize that.
No, but that helps clarification there. Thank you.
I'll make that correction. Thank you. And then, although, did I get it? Okay, so if you go to the next slide, you can see that, again, it's the initial contract document. The wage increases for the current fiscal year, so I got that part right. It's FY '25 is 2.5%, and then it's the baseline increases are 2% for the upcoming fiscal years. What makes the police different is this post-certification, which is the Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission certification, which applies to all police officers in the Commonwealth and all departments. And when this was implemented a few years back, in the Brookline case of mediation from the and arbitration from the Massachusetts Joint Labor Relations Commission, which resolves public safety disputes, they awarded certification stipend in the Brookline case, to the chagrin of the Mass Municipal Association and cities and towns across the Commonwealth, but then became the norm. And so again, when we prepare for negotiations and conduct negotiations, we look at what are the actions from the Massachusetts Joint Labor Relations Committee, what are the current contract settlements, and then obviously we do our comparables for our neighboring comparable communities. And sadly, the trend on that is 2% per year over the 3-year contracts. And basically, where we did a 4-year, we kind of split it into fourths. Although if you look at the timing of it, it's a bit, because we did the first 1.5% on June 30th, which is the last day of the first year of the contract. So it amounted to a 3, 1.5, 1.5, but basically it's 6% over the life of the contract. And so that's sort of the anomaly or the distinction. And again, when we're at the table and we're conducting negotiations and we're contemplating, what if you don't reach agreement? What's the outcome if you don't settle? That's what you weigh. And we knew that this was before us. So that's the summary of the Police Commanders Association.
Paul, a quick question.
Yes.
So does that mean, like, for fiscal '26, it's 2 plus the 1, so it's
Yes.
3.5 increase? I just
Yes.
want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, so that's the breakdown. And you see it a little bit better on the next slide where you see the sergeant's contract. So again, you see a 2, 2, and a 2, and then on top of that, they get the 2% per the 3 fiscal years for the certification. So basically, you're looking at 4, 4, and 4. There's no other way to describe it. And then we also had this, again, this is the anomaly of the bargaining. The non-union employees of the town have a percentage longevity. The lieutenants had, percentage longevity. That remained in the new contract, and now we're trying to maintain uniformity. So we basically converted the current dollar amount longevity schedule into an equivalent percentage. It doesn't have an impact the first fiscal year, obviously, but obviously the reason they want the percentages in subsequent fiscal years as the pay rate increases, the longevity increases, because it's on a percentage basis, and therefore they don't have to negotiate that going forward. And then there was a minor change of a $10 per shift for the officer in charge compensation when there's no lieutenant on those shifts where there's no lieutenant on duty. And then the final one was the Police Patrol Officers Association. Here was a similar but a little more distinct. One of the concerns that we're also dealing with in addition to the post-certification is the fact that the state has implemented a new civil service provision where you now can take 50% of your hires under civil service, not off the civil service list, but by an open, competitive, fair process, which basically means you're now in a more competitive market, because if you hired a civil service officer and that civil service officer wanted to go to another civil service community, both chiefs have to sign off in the agreement, meaning the community that is hired and trained and put this officer through the academy, brought them on board and moved forward, would have to sign off, the release of that officer. Well, that's all gone away now. in terms of the fact that you now have a open process where you can hire people not on the civil service list. And they have also, and so what's happening is we now have to look even more closer at what is our competitive wage schedule in terms of new recruits as well as retention. I think we may have discussed here at a meeting, and I know we discussed it in other meetings, that we actually had an officer that we put through the academy for 24 weeks, was in field training, and then the officer left us for another community for a significant increase in pay. And then we had a more longer-term officer depart for another community for an increase in pay. In that case, it was a non-civil service community. But the reality is it is now a case where because not as many people want to become police officers, and you now have communities like Tewksbury who have opted out entirely out of civil service, that we have to be more competitive with our compensation for new officers in order to retain and recruit and then retain them. So that explains what you see here. The other items there is, one is we modified the pay schedule by dropping the initial academy initial step, and then adding a new step 5 that's 6% above the existing step 5. What's the 6%? It's that 2% per year post certification we threw in as a new top step. So in this case, it makes our pay schedule more competitive, but obviously the only ones who are going to get there is you'd have to be there 5 years to get to that new top step. And then you see the standard 2% per year wage increase to the pay schedule. We also modified extra pay detail language to be similar to what the sergeants and lieutenants have had in their contract. That has to do with Sunday details, where they're basically getting double time for utility Sunday details. And then similarly on the educational incentive, a dozen years ago when the state did away with the Quinn-Bill Police Career Incentive Program that they contributed to, when we brought the educational incentive up again to the market because other towns retained it, we didn't at the time institute a master's level or a law degree level, which historically had been 25% above the, because basically if you got a associate was 10% in educational incentive, bachelor's was 20, and then master's in law was 25. At the time, we took the position, and we didn't have then any, that really doesn't benefit the town to have a person with a master's degree or a law degree at the patrol officer level. Now we come back to today's market. We have officers, and there are officers as part of this competitive process, who look at your community and look at their compensation and say, where's my ability if I stay or if I have to get that 25% stipend opportunity. So we basically brought it back, and again, it aligns to what other towns have, most importantly, at the patrol level. Similarly, we did the same thing with the longevity payment that I described earlier. And then the other thing that was really becoming an issue was the EMT mandated certification requirement. We have some officers who did not pass the certification, which we then would lose them. And then the same thing is we're trying to retain and recruit officers, particularly in the recruitment. That's a barrier for some for entry. And so we've left the incentive there, but we've eliminated the mandated requirement for that. So that's the summary of the 3 agreements. Again, you can see a lot of our outcomes are driven by external factors, either regulatory factors such as JLMC and the state's new civil service requirements, or market factors in the case of compensation. Oh, thank you. That's the presentation on the articles
Thank you.
at this time.
Any questions?
Yeah, question.
Yeah,
The question needs to be generic, but
sure.
given this contract, will it have an effect on your other negotiations in either way? And I know it's a
Yeah.
generic
No,
question.
I think it's a fair
Don't
question.
answer it
It's a fair question, and I think it will. I think, however, it is a unique thing to this profession.
Right.
For example, the teachers have always had to be certified, but they don't get a stipend for certification.
Right.
And there's no equivalent that we can see elsewhere, other than the state had adopted, and John knows about this nominal compensation for accountants, treasurer collectors, and assessors who got their certification. But I'm talking like $1,500 things, not percentages of pay levels. So to true answer your question, Dave, is yes, but it's and that was why there was such pushback to the what we call the Brookline arbitration decision, where they awarded because the towns, and I still don't believe that was what police reform. That was not what police reform was intended to do. Police reform was intended to be able to remove underperforming or poorly issues of police performance and conduct, and instead it became a compensation benefit. But that's the way the cards were dealt.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, public comment. Seeing no public. Move right along to review, discussion, and vote on recommendations for fiscal year 26 budget, Springtown meeting, warrant articles 2 and 6. So I'm back to the language of 2. And do I have a motion?
I make a motion to recommend Article 2, fiscal year 2025 operating budget amendments in the amount of $347,500 from the fiscal year 2025 Finance Committee Reserve Fund. Remainder as follows.
I second it.
Discussion?
That's what it's there for.
Yep.
It's good use of the money.
And I think the town manager adequately explained that these were all unforeseen expenses, which is part of the statutory requirement for us to take advantage of this. So-
Well, yes, but we wouldn't need the statute to use the Finance
Right.
Committee Reserve Fund outside of, in a town meeting. If we're outside a town meeting, we need the statute requirement for extraordinary and unforeseen. If the funds are being used through the vote of a town meeting, that takes away the requirement. But even with that, they are being used for unforeseen
Right.
expenses. We have done that in the past. If as the town manager explained, if we did not do this, there would be some curtailing and cutting up to the end of the fiscal year. These all make sense to me. All right. All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Hearing none. 6 in favor, 1 absent. All right. Article 6.
I make a motion to recommend Article 6, collective bargaining agreements in the amount of $502,264 for the current fiscal year for employee contracts between the town and its collecting bargaining units for the period as follows,
As presented.
as presented.
Second?
Discussion?
So again, another newbie question here is how, mechanically, how does this work? All right, so the 502, like where does that come from?
Well, so raise and appropriate, so it's funds from the levy, it's tax funds, it's money that's available, and we're voting it into the budget. So this money will be taken from there. So it becomes part of the overall budget. And because we can't set aside money ahead of time, so I think we had a
Right.
discussion, we were talking about the union contract negotiations
Right.
with the school unions. Though they're allowed under statute to set aside funds and pre-plan, we cannot. So these funds now become part of the budget. So the overall amount of the budget is increased essentially by 502, 264.
Not the total amount, just the amount for 2025 gets added to the 26 budget, right? So you're kind of doing a one-time
Yeah.
charge,
Exactly.
a catch-up charge, because you can't accrue for it going in, like we don't have a balance for it accrued.
Yeah.
So we do a catch-up, and then each year afterwards, their new salary will be
built into
recorded
the
to each
budget,
budget.
Be in the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's what I was missing.
Yep. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Hearing none, 6 in favor, 1 absent. Next on our agenda is a review of the reporting schedule. So, report tomorrow. Everyone has the draft of the chairman's letter. Any comments, let me know. If not, that's fine. As I noted in my email, there are just a couple, there are the two, Article 6, Article 2 need to be inserted and included. I'll get those off hopefully this evening. And then there's just a tweak to one of the article summaries. But for the most part, everything should be ready to go. And so Pam, tomorrow morning, you'll have the letter ready to go so we can submit it to the printer.
Did anyone actually review it? Because I haven't had any corrections or anything. So did anyone, like, review the blurbs that I have all the numbers right and everything of that stuff?
There's one that you'll have to change, and I'll get that to you.
Okay.
It's the one regarding the CFP, because I think what happened is in the presentation initially, it had listed the source of funding for open space twice, and it said 150, then 135.
Okay.
One of them is supposed to be historic, and it's not supposed to be open space. And I looked at it and figured it out. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be because the numbers don't line up otherwise.
Okay.
So Article 26, I think it is, somewhere around there. There is a 150 and a 135. So 150 twice, and then a 135. You'll see it in my blurb in the chairman letter. That's probably the best place to pull it from, Pam. Because I break it down as to the four sources of funding for this year. And so it just needs to be inserted, whichever one's missing, and I think it was the 150, one of the 150s, it needs to be put into the later section in the book. But I'll send you that.
Okay.
Yeah, as a note. Everything else looked, from my cursory review, looked like it was accurate. I don't know if anybody else had an opportunity to read through.
I literally opened it.
Looks fine to me.
Get a chance to finish
Fine,
it.
me too.
I read through it. I didn't take and tie every number, but it was reasonability check.
Yep. And then the new voting language is in the back that we had in the fall, I think, so I think we're good with that, too. All right. Okay. So we'll get that off. We'll get it to the printers, I guess, tomorrow.
Yep.
Sent over to the town. Be posted, and so everyone that got their letter as a town meeting rep can now find something at the link and be able to review it, and then they'll be ready for the town manager session next Wednesday at the senior center at 7 o'clock? At 7 o'clock. All right. Next on our agenda is a discussion of plans for upcoming meetings. This is normally where I say, hey, we'll see you guys in September. Guess what?
What?
Not happening.
Why?
We'll be meeting earlier than then. So the town managers reached out to me the other day, I think it was yesterday, actually. There is going to be the need for a special town meeting on June 23rd, I think is the date the select board selected. And so we'll need to meet at least, well, I think it should be only once, based upon the request. Just to give a quick synopsis of why that's needed, and I have it right here. Bear with me. So essentially, as we voted in, I believe, was it last fall? We voted for a study, $100,000 study for the design work for the South Row partial roof replacement. They have now had the meeting with the OPM that we have a number available. The estimated, I think it's public knowledge, estimated cost is going to be around $3 million. And so there'll be a need, in order to make sure that we're on schedule for 2026 replacement, really need to get the bids out this summer. And so in order to do that, the money will have to be secured through a vote at town meeting, and we'll need to have that ready to go before those bids go out, so we can stay on track to do that work. I won't go into the other details, but they'll be presented to us before a vote. Additionally, I think it's a placeholder for other collective bargaining agreements that might come in between now and then, the June 23rd. Well, actually, no, at least 2 weeks prior to June 23rd, because pursuant to the town code, we have to, for special town meetings, have our recommendations out 2 weeks in advance as opposed to 1 week in advance of town meeting. So really, as far as scheduling is concerned, we're looking at the last date that we could hold a meeting in order to meet that would be really June 5th. June 5th, yeah. because if it's the 23rd, we need to get our book out no later than the 9th. So it'll be a quick turnaround, June 5th, possibly even May 29th, depending on when information is available and ready to vote on. So keep that in mind, either May 29th or June 5th. We'll need to have a meeting to do the vote for the partial roof replacement, possibly collective bargaining agreements, and then there are two other potential things that might be available. Language for mausoleums at the cemeteries, just updated language. And then the other one was, there's a potential request for the Community Preservation Fund to conduct a perimeter survey at Coolis. So that would need a vote of town meeting as well. And so I guess the good news is there'd be multiple items available for a special town meeting. If we're going to hold a special town meeting, at least have more than one thing to vote on. It makes having the special town meeting a little bit more
Special.
a little more yeah, thanks, Steve. A little more special, yeah. So keep that in mind. Either that last Thursday in May or the first Thursday in June. The only problem with the first Thursday in June, if we do hold it, is that's typically the night that they hold the zoning board of appeals. And so if we were to have it on June 5th, it would be in conflict with that, and we wouldn't be able to live broadcast. We'd have to go in another room and do a recording for future viewing, which is not the end of the world. But just keep that in mind, that we'd have to do that if we hold it on the 5th rather than on the 28th, I think 29th it is.
We'll push for the 29th.
Okay.
It's got to go to the select board packet for their meeting on the
Oh,
2nd anyway.
well, that, perfect, okay,
Do
so,
May?
yeah, let's target May 29th.
Okay, 'cause I can't do June
Excellent.
4th.
You can't do June, okay,
5th.
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 5th, well, I'll be, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Either way, can't do it.
I can't
What
do it.
happens if
Either
you
way,
don't have a
can't do it.
quorum?
What happens if you don't have a quorum? You don't have a meeting.
That's it.
I understand that, but then what do you do? Call it at a later date?
You would have
Where
to
do you
call,
go
you'd
with
have to,
that?
you would have to call it at a later date, and we would be not in compliance with the code, if that's the, you can't hold a meeting if you don't have a quorum. Yeah, so,
That's why I asked the question.
why? You planning on not being here?
I will go out of my way to be here.
Special town meeting's on the 23rd?
23rd of June, yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's our upcoming meeting. We can talk about, but hey, we'll be able to vote on our minutes from this night
Wow.
prior to September. Fantastic. Look at that.
Now, there's an upside, Jim.
All right. Any further public comment? No public. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right. See you at town meeting.
7:07.